The open sea can be a dangerous place, and by the 1950s people began taking note of how many incidents were occurring between Florida and Puerto Rico. Nowadays, it's most believed this is just an area of harsh environmental surprises, not unlike any other particularly harsh sea route to traverse. It might have only drawn attention for being between very populated areas of media-producing people to ponder all the disappearances, creating a canvas to paint horror stories onto. And those horror stories got game adaptations. 1982's Bermuda Experience lets you play through these spooky stories from the perspective of the heavily armed SS Nemesis, exploring and managing supplies as you attempt to survive the various horror stories that have been written about the area, from time travel to aliens. From the creator of Forgotten Island, this has that text cursor style movement, but feels so fluid with how you seamlessly transition from ship to land to back to ship without a second of delay. Though there is occasional loading areas and disc swapping as you explore the open world that expands past the triangle all the way to Jamaica. And don't forget, with time travel you'll be seeing other periods in modern day. A step forward from Forgotten Island that makes me ponder its obscurity in conversations. I've enjoyed playing the maybe 3 Crystalware published games and feeling that leap in quality, but when I look at the entire catalog, I wonder how many people skipped around like that, and how many people grew fatigued from getting the games in between. There's often cited to be a general negative outlook toward frequent releases that didn't raise the bar enough at the time, and as much as people like to over-exaggerate with misleading statistic labels, video games as a whole were quickly finding themselves right back where the first generation ended about 7 years prior, with consumers growing bored by the sea of clones not raising the bar, leading to them moving on.
Something a little bit more complex.
Atari never got the message. What happened virtually overnight, more than 6,000 people lost their jobs.
That being said, it's not like Atari or the still multi-billion-dollar video game industry were about to go away. There was still an overwhelming amount of video games releasing and being celebrated. There was a bunch of Game of the Years for 1984. This was more of a mass shaving off of the shovelware culprits via everyone growing more skeptical about which games they buy, fund, and stock. 1983 might be the noisiest year in terms of that shovelware. So what horror games were being drowned out by all that noise? 1983's Ghost Manor for the VCS. It's one end of a double-sided cartridge, and has you choose one of 2 buddies to rescue the unchosen of the duo from the clutches of Dracula, when horrific lands suddenly rise from the ground around you, as if being caught in an echo of what once stood there. It would, however, seem that with the character select being done via the color switch, and the default being the girl, there is no way to select the boy in a 7800, perhaps a classic case of backwards compatibility problems, with the goal of going in at night to rescue your imprisoned companion by dawn. As the game puts it, a scary challenge awaits. But first, you begin the game by meeting either a friendly rainbow ghost, or Bones the Skeleton, who you gather supplies with in the graveyard, playing tag, with the next area and your goal viewable in the distance, which is one of my favorite environmental art choices in games. Combined with the level of animation, it leaves a good and fun first impression. And once you have enough ammo, which depends on which of the 4 difficulties you're playing, you can attempt the actual rescue, where at the castle gates you're introduced to the game's antagonist faction of iconic horror monsters. And this collective doesn't plan on splitting up to be your bosses throughout the game. They all jump you at once. If you can survive that, making it into the castle itself is where the game turns into a more explore the danger-filled mansion type of horror game. There's moving walls that can crush you, but thankfully not when you touch them while they're moving away. Much like Haunted House the previous year, you'll be in darkness outside of the lightning through the windows briefly illuminating the environment. Unless you're on easy mode, which begins you with the lamp, alongside finding crucifixes that can serve as special ammo for 1 week to it. There's also general loot to find that will add to the points that make up your score. And I find this game well suited for subsequent runs. This game offers what might have been split into multiple full-price single-screen games by other publishers of the time, which makes me think of the variety of scale of games. When I think of VCS games, I think of the larger scale ones as opposed to the quick single-screen games. Of course, sometimes quick amusement is all you need, which is why a horror game of 1983 that seems frequently remembered is Frankenstein's Monster. Outside of occasionally dodging bats, it's primarily a single-screen platformer where you make multiple trips back and forth to barricade the monster in its chamber before it awakes. What a grim fate to leave it to. Failing to do this results in one of my favorite game overs in history. I find this game fun to run, with its scoring system and even a competitive mode that has 2 players' alternate attempts. It reminds me of Revenge of the Beefsteak Tomatoes, a game I could never quite decide my feelings on. The 1978 musical comedy horror Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is a movie that's lived on perhaps through having a title as fun as its tone, and the 1983 VCS equivalent mirrors that tone. Perhaps it was a form of protest against bottled ketchup, or maybe they were provoked by acid rain. Previously harmless garden tomatoes started turning into cold-blooded killers. Big beefsteak tomatoes started flying about, rudely splattering innocent bystanders. No weapon known to man could prevent those vicious veggies from multiplying. Just when it all seemed hopeless. Someone suggested that since the plants can't be destroyed, they should just be trapped behind brick walls. Now the question is, can enough walls be built in time to stop the tomatoes from taking over the world? With its perhaps appropriately poor visuals, it comes off as a parody of the video game landscape of the time. It's satisfying to take and place bricks while in the constant chaos of the infestation. The 3 color-coded walls that you need to keep on top of clearing brick eaters from. But while I find the task itself to be mindless fun, once you clear a screen, there's a lack of that feeling of accomplishment caused by you having infinite lives. To have a higher score, you don't need to survive longer, you just need to have not put the controller down the longest, which, for whatever reason, makes it feel less satisfying to me. The simple look on a black screen does remind me of another game though. 1983's Nightmare for the Odyssey 2. It has you attempting to escape a mansion that's being rather conductive in a lightning storm, while dangerous ghosts are about. The exit's right there. Can you make it? How about in competitive multiplayer where a human controls the ghost? Making the whole experience reminiscent of 1972's Haunted House for the Odyssey 1. But it also makes me wonder how people still felt about single-screen games at the time. Sometimes you paid more than Pitfall and found out you bought another Pac-Man clone that got a 7 out of 10 from the reviewer you saw, despite being called middle of the road, which you think is a 5, since even the publication said that's a 5. Perhaps the most impressive horror game of 1983 for me is Dracula for the Intellivision. It's visually dense yet fast-paced and dynamic, while taking place in a seamless world in which you can transform on the fly to explore, weather causing lightning effects and a day and night cycle. You're a nocturnal member of this ecosystem of predators and prey, from wolves that attack ground animals, to flying members of this ecosystem like vultures. As a vampire, you hunt humans, scope out their houses, see them home, and break in while also wanting to avoid dangerous humans who've taken a stand against you. You may overwhelm them with zombies, which themselves are a result of being bit, turning from one part of the ecosystem to another. Just remember what happens to vampires during the daytime. As the manual puts it, Dracula, my man, you have some grave problems. I find myself favoring dynamic systems over scripted set pieces in games, and this delivers in spades. Now, if you're on Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit, Forbidden Forest may not have as complex a living world as Dracula for the Intellivision, but had an impressive use of parallax scrolling, creating a greater feeling of perspective and motion to sell said dangerous nature you're exploring. While not exactly smoothly transitioning, there is a change in color palette to denote a darker time of night, with stars shining brighter in the darker night sky and the moon slowly progressing. I always see it referred to as a day and night cycle, but it doesn't cycle or become day. It seems to just go from evening to so early in the morning that the sun hasn't risen yet. I see how this game puts people on edge. The giant snake positioned behind the trees. The Demogorgon's position being revealed by lightning strikes. The presentation is incredible. 2 years later, a sequel would even play more with moving in the Z-axis, giving it a 3D playing field long before the 2003 remake. Though there was no shortage of 3D games in '83. If slow-paced but real-time horror is your preference, a game whose name is evoked occasionally in horror discussions is Crypts of Chaos. An FPS for the VCS where you explore a dark labyrinth of creepy halls. Outside of long-range firing, your ultimate weapon is a ring that can steal monsters' life force for yourself, when you have limited munition for both. And ammo isn't just lying on the floor. You'll need to work quite a bit for 2 more ring charges and only 10 more shots at a time. If you squander your supplies, you may have to fall back to the blade for close quarters combat. Of course, you can also try to talk your way out of situations, but not every monster is one that can be reasoned with. Real-time combat is something I always have an appreciation for, and there can be an extra layer of tension from real-time switching of your weapon while something is still barreling at you. I describe the aiming as original RE4 minus the Y-axis. You're pretty free in aiming but can't move and aim simultaneously. This also creates a feeling of random battles as once something spots you, you're locked into your action menu to talk or fight, but not run. There's even a 180-degree turn button in your action menu, but it's unpressable if a monster's in your sights. This game is definitely not for everyone, and I would not call the graphics good for VCS given the other first-person games on the console, but I find it captures the atmosphere of its cover art, and is a very interesting curiosity. There must be so many great horror games that are just buried under all the shovelware of unambitious movie license tie-ins, Pac-Man and Space Invaders clones. But thankfully that didn't last long, as 1983 reminded the industry of valuable lessons in rising standards and shop curation. I'm Oktaro.